Michael Sukkar, thanks for joining us. I wonder if I could ask you first about this tweet from China. It just seems to be such a base, abusive level at which to conduct diplomacy. It shows that the relationship is in real strife.
Well, Chris, as the Prime Minister said, really this false depiction is repugnant, and I think the PM sent an appropriate message that I think conveys the feelings of most Australians, and that is that that uniform means so much to Australians, and to denigrate it in that way, as you said, is unprecedented in diplomacy, certainly, and not the way that we would expect anyone to engage with us. We revere that uniform. The men and women who have served in that uniform have fought for extraordinary causes. And it's repugnant, and to come from an official account in the way it did, I think rightly angers all Australians.
I think there's no doubt about that, but the other aspect is it just shows how toxic the relationship between Canberra and Beijing has become. Now, we know about the economic consequences. We've seen the tariffs on barley, a doubling of tariffs or more on our wine. We've got coal ships stranded off the coast of China. How worried are you about the continuing trade implications and economic implications for Australia?
Well, Chris, there's no doubt that all of those issues, particularly the trade and economic implications, are things that we think about very deeply and are always actively engaged in trying to ensure are in the best possible position. But at the end of the day, we're not going to cede our sovereignty. We're a very proud country. We're a nation who will always stand up for our own best interests. And as a government, the Morrison government will always stand up for the national interest of Australians and Australia more broadly. So in the end, we believe that our relationship with China through these difficult periods can only get better with engagement. We've obviously been very open to that. We have been happy to engage at a leader level, at a ministerial level. That's how these sorts of issues are dealt with. They're certainly not dealt with by really repugnant tweets from official accounts that are so highly offensive and one can only imagine was designed to be highly offensive.
Don't we need to see more interventions from other nations? The US has a bit of a leadership vacuum at the moment, but other European nations, developed countries around the world standing up to this sort of bullying behaviour from China, both in the tweet but also, of course, in these trade sanctions?
Well, Chris, I think what we've already seen and what we'll continue to see is proud countries will react to this level of assertiveness in a way similar to ourselves. And, we have no interest in having any form of confected fights or arguments with China, but at the same time, Australia is a proud country and we will always stand up for our own best interests and our national interest, and as a government we'll always stand up for the Australian national interest. And in the end, we all have an interest in working cooperatively. We're obviously very different countries. Our political systems are very different. We're an open, free democracy, extraordinarily different from China, but the way that we engage with one another has to be respectful. I think the PM did the right thing by calling it out.
If we come back to our domestic economy and the fact that all levels of government, federal and state, have gone into really unprecedented post-war levels of debt because of the pandemic response, are you particularly worried about your home state, Victoria, where there seems to be some messages coming from the credit rating agencies that it could lose its AAA credit rating?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that that levels of debt are concerning, and at a state government level, particularly state governments who don't have the taxing and revenue collection powers, shall we say, that the federal government obviously have, it is concerning when you see those levels of debt spiralling, often without any broad plan on how they seek to address that. And I don't think I could see any obvious pathway or outline from the Victorian State Government on how they proposed to, over time, reduce that record level of debt. So, of course, it's concerning. At a federal government level, we've obviously stated very clearly that our pathway back to recovery is what takes precedence. And then once unemployment is below 6%, we look at the fiscal recovery and getting the budget back into good shape. And, you know, I think Australians expect to see that you chart the pathway back to budget management, understanding that now is a time when we do have to use that fiscal firepower to ensure that our economy remains strong, and that in the Morrison government's case to make sure that people can get back into jobs. And I think what gives Australians comfort from a Morrison government perspective is they've seen us undertake budget repair. We've levelled with the Australian people on what we propose to do into the future as far as fiscal repair once unemployment's below 6%. And I think not seeing that sort of pathway being discussed by state governments, understandably, particularly the Victorian people, makes them very nervous about the debt that the Victorian government is taking on, seemingly with no plan for repaying it.
Just finally, though, Michael Sugo, one of the things outside of the federal government's control is the way states react to the pandemic. You had Victoria in that brutal long-term lockdown. You had South Australia with a precipitous lockdown that they pulled out of just a couple of weeks ago. You need to have states that can deal with outbreaks without any more severe shutdowns, because the whole of the country then suffers economically.
Yeah, Chris, there's no doubt about it. Obviously, the hotel quarantine disaster, through the obvious failures that were there, but as well as the contact tracing failures that were then present in Victoria, plus border closures, have a huge economic impact. And by and large, the federal government, who has had direct measures of over $257 billion to support the economy, has borne the brunt of picking up those economic consequences. But over time, Chris, I think the ability for states to just do that in a wanton fashion will reduce, and hopefully, that over time, that their capabilities as far as dealing with outbreaks and the political will to deal with it in a mature way means that we don't have this stop-start, open-close sort of mentality that has happened to date. Because in the end, we want to work ultimately for the benefit of Australians, and it can be at times frustrating to deal with these sorts of wanton and arbitrary decisions, but we only have one focus, and that's how we support Australian people, and we have to do that in the face of difficult decisions made by state governments from time to time, and just accept it and move on. That's sort of the frustration, but the reality of being in the federal government.